There are problems to marriage that man is taking to God that have been solved. That there is a knowledge sufficient for you to solve that problem. I told Rachel, I love you. I will not watch this.
One of the best things, and there's so many amazing things that have happened to me getting married, but one of the best things is not having to make decisions. I really don't like making decisions.
Being brainwashed by Felix.
Gracious Father in heaven, we give you thanks, we give you glory, we give you all the honor, for you're worthy of it all. We thank you for this day. We thank you for another podcast, another opportunity to just share what is on our hearts, oh Lord. Father, we pray that the meditations of our hearts and the words of our mouths shall be pleasing and acceptable in your sight, O Lord. Father, may there be nothing that comes out of us that is not to the glory of your name. And Father, even as we just share and talk, we pray that whoever encounters what we share, that Father, they shall be changed, they shall be touched, that it shall do whatever it is that you desire it does in their lives. And even as that happens, O Lord, may we be ministered to as well. In Jesus' name we believed and prayed.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Mwine. Welcome to the...
I do try this. It's for boxing.
It's not still a Mwine. No pressure, no pressure. Welcome to the Kitaka's podcast, Sabo.
Humbled, honored, Nzani. Good to be. Good to be.
No fussy mics today.
No forcing, man.
Wanted to keep it homely, simple, but good to have you.
Good to be with you guys.
It's always a joy.
Yeah, yes it is. Which is a shame because we keep talking about how, we should do this a lot more often, and then we end up doing it twice every year.
It was supposed to happen once every month, huh?
Yeah.
That's a story for another
Yes. Baby steps, baby steps.
Otherwise, how is so? Alive.
Yes. There are many people who would want to be able to say that and cannot.
Yeah.
So we don't take it for granted. The Bible says, if you look at a lot of the prayers, most of them usually start, you who give life and breath to all men. And we now live in a society where it's very easy to take the most basic things for granted. I keep joking how COVID taught us how important oxygen was. We learned.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, they don't have oxygen, the world was. So for me, usually when someone asks me how I am, first go to places, I'm alive. Then everything else now is a bonus. I am blessed, I am grateful, yeah.
And what's interesting when you say that, I'm reminded I was talking to a friend some time back. It was about how the world has brought everything around money.
Yeah.
But when you start to think about the blessing of God, there are things like favor, there are things like health, there are things like peace. All those cannot be given a monetary value.
Yeah.
And yet when people measure the state of their lives, or even whether they are blessed, they go to what's the figure.
What's the net worth, right?
Yeah.
Again, so you guys have known me long enough to know that I try and approach everything that I do from the perspective of, is there something from the Word of God that speaks to that? And one of the verses that I'm famous for quoting, maybe too much, is Luke 12:15. It says that a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. We have completely ignored that verse that Jesus put out. We strain, we suffer, we steal, we kill, we thief, we do whatever it takes to get as much as we can. I think maybe because we don't know that on the other side of it, you will discover that actually it's not what makes you happy. It's not about And yet it's in our faces. I have learned how to be with plenty and how to be with nothing. It's in our faces. For whatever reason, we choose to ignore it and insist on stressing and hustling and bustling.
But it's quite interesting. You had a thought?
Yeah, I think it's really because we are. And I've lost my thought.
I'll catch it for you in the meantime.
Sure.
So what's fascinating, I remember in 2020, I gave everything of mine away. And I lived on the floor for 6 months.
Crazy man.
And the part I was trying to get to was the death to self. I remember reading Genesis and having a light bulb moment when Adam realized that he was naked. And I got to realize what changed in Adam was a self-consciousness, that he became alive to self. Now, in my meditations then, the goal was saying, Felix, you need to be able to die to self. So I was in a moment where I've left my job, I have no income, and I'm trying to think about how to balance things. And I realized self-preservation was responsible for the burden I carried. So I figured if I can cut everything off, then I have no burden, right? And I spent almost 6 months on the floor without any job per se. And I got by.
You didn't die.
You didn't
die.
I didn't die, right?
You didn't die.
But I noticed the dilemma is when I got married, suddenly there were responsibilities that transcended certain things. And expectations, right? So suddenly you realize the possessions you're willing to part with are sometimes having a part of a necessity. And I think that creates an interesting dynamic. Was how do you balance that? How do you remain dead to self and yet not neglecting your own or your responsibilities? And I was thinking to myself, I don't know if I told my wife, that I thought I had done progress in being dead to self until I got married. Because suddenly when my wife felt disrespectful, it hurt deep. And I couldn't take it.
Let me tell you what I think was happening.
Yeah.
I think death comes in different stages.
Okay.
This is just me thinking.
Yeah.
So you were dead to self before. You just didn't have this external stimulus
Yeah.
to take you to the next
Ah.
level. Yes.
Ah.
So the next marriage is like the next level of stimulation to just take you to the next level.
Actually, I disagree.
Okay.
I don't think you take death to the next level. I think, have you seen there's a Tom Cruise movie, The Edge of Tomorrow. It's a movie in which he keeps reliving the same day over and over and over again. It's a genre that has been done quite a bit in Hollywood. There's been a number of movies that have been done that way. But there's a very huge lesson from that movie for me that speaks to this thing. You can never die, but that now you have died, you have ticked that box and that's it. Your death has to be daily. It is a non-negotiable. You every morning, the only thing I think you can do for yourself is to make the choice that I am going to die daily. Because on a daily basis, there will be, like you mentioned, triggers. You will die to certain things easily, but every day there will be opportunities for you to realize, oh, I haven't died to road rage yet. You discover I haven't died to road rage, I haven't died to maybe inability to let go of material possessions, I haven't died to offense, where your boss comes and says something absolutely ridiculous and you're like, no. And of like, this is now. So I think that you must make a choice to die daily. One of my biggest wins in terms of dying to self was road rage. You've driven in Kampala, you know, people will test you to the limits. And for me, one time, my wheelbarrow, as I like to call it, So I love it so much. I want to take care of it. It's falling apart, but every once in a while I manage to gather some coins and say, let me redo this thing. So I take it to the garage and have it repainted. It spends maybe about 10 days in the garage. They've repainted it. I'm coming out of the garage, feeling good. I've turned up the music and then just coming down into the road from the garage. Boda guy just comes and puts a big scratch in the bonnet like this.
Like God, not this one.
So it's funny, and yet it's not. Because in that moment I realized, oh, okay, I was so angry, but I'm amused at the same time. I'm convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that God was just using that to just teach me that, you know what, this thing is a bit of a idol for you. So I left it. I actually never touched that car from that point on for maybe another 4 or 5 years. So it had scratches and dents and everything. So I just had it redone recently. But even now, when a boda guy knocks me, I look at the guy, I just smile. There's a guy who actually got scared. I think he thought maybe I was going to pull out a gun or a stick or something. So he came back. No, it's okay, you go. So that one I have died too, or so I thought, until 3 weeks ago. These guys who create their own lanes in the middle of the road comes, and then, because I was running late for a meeting, and he's clearly driving like an idiot, right? I'm thinking, so about 5 seconds into the road rage, small voice. I thought we had finished. I'm like, okay, clearly I hadn't died yet. So I calmed down, got out of the way and went. While the guy is doing this at you, the guy who is in the wrong is the one insulting you, speaking about your mother in so nice ways.
That level of provocation.
So yeah, so just to make the point that I think that your dying is something that you've got to do on a daily basis for as long as you live.
And interesting, as you speak about death, had an interesting piece that was amusing me. Where I made peace with my non-complete death in marriage. And the realization was the people who are truly dead didn't get married. You see? Yeah. Paul was like,
guys.
I'd rather you don't get into this business, but if you must, right?
He wanted us, we didn't listen. Now here we are.
Thank you, right? Even Jesus knew something, right? God came in the form of man, the excellence of man. And he said, no, just leave the woman alone.
That's the one piece he just did not indulge.
If anyone would have been the perfect husband. Yeah, no, and look, again, we laugh about it, but actually it is the honest truth that, so when we were getting married, we did a lot of counseling and went through all these things, and then people will tell you, marriage is work, marriage is hard, we're in love, we're like, these people they don't know, we will show them, we are going to show them. And then a few months in, those words begin to ring in your ear of like, actually, you know what? Yeah, this thing is, I mean, it's sweet. Look, that's not.
Oh, it's amazing.
It's the best thing that can happen to you, in my opinion. But the truth of the matter is that it is work. You have to make a choice on a daily basis. A friend of mine, I'll never forget his words. Unfortunately, he didn't follow his own advice, and along the way, you know. But I remember he used to say, for two people that are genetically different, that come from different backgrounds, in many cases that will come from different tribes or different whatever, to be able different chromosomes, to be able to come together and become one, can only be described as a miracle, can only be done as an act of faith. And if you take those two things out of the understanding of marriage, there is no chance for any marriage to work, which is why the divorce rates are literally through the sky. Because I think we fail to understand that as an individual, you are completely incapable of sustaining this relationship. On a daily basis, there are enough reasons for you to say, you know what, I'm done. On a daily basis.
This happens even with our siblings. Now, if it happens with our siblings and you basically share the same DNA, you are raised in the same home, of course we're different, and you just fail many times to see eye to eye with your siblings, sit around the table and agree to the most basic things, how much more someone you've met as a grown adult with both of you so set in your different ways.
After decades of conditioning.
So at what point do we just become disillusioned and think that I love jackfruit. I really, really love jackfruit. But it's crazy for me to expect that I'm going to enjoy the jackfruit and not have to deal with the sap. It just doesn't make sense. But we continue and we hope that it will just happen somehow.
But to bring in something you mentioned about your friend in passing, about his not taking his own advice. There's something I got to learn, that every time you have, it's like every knowledge you have is going to be put to the test. That as a matter of fact, he got into trouble because of the knowledge he had. You see, the ignorant may have a certain liberty, but the one who knows, you're going to be tested. I don't think many people in Job's time went through what Job went through. Job's faithfulness.
I don't think many people have ever gone through what Job went through.
And live. Thank you.
Yeah.
But he was a man who was so upright. I remember reading the Bible. They was making a sacrifice, made sacrifice for his children, just in case they erred. That was how particular the man was. And for a man who conducted himself as such a great test came upon him. And I think that for me is what scares me most about marriage. Even much more being one doing a sort of a marriage ministry of sorts. Because my word is out there. Right? And I imagine there are certain demons that are set up. They are scribes in the demonic world who are trying to find how to make sure I go against the word I've spoken. Yeah. And when I understood that, I got to understand you can't do marriage without God. Yes. Because marriage by nature, it is, and this is what's interesting about, we've been talking about death to self. But death to self is not an end in itself. It's death to self and alive to Christ. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And that becomes the power, the enabling factor for you to make things happen. And when you talk about marriage being a miracle, I think it also what you can add to it is marriage being a spiritual experience. Yeah. That is that death to self and aliveness to Christ, and Christ works in you. Because there are dimensions to love where your wife can do certain things and you think again about the love part.
Or you can do certain things.
Or you can do certain things and things about the respect.
Yeah.
How do you respect this chap after what he has done? Right? And when you look at all that, I remember there's what John talks about, a greater love knows no man such as this, that a man laid down his life for his friends. I remember I used to go to church and people used to like the verse, as he is, so are we in this world. But it's like he didn't understand the man he's referring to. He's a man who found it not robbery to be one with God, yet humbled himself in the form of a servant. And that measure of Christ.
Humbled himself to death.
Pardon?
Humbled himself to the point of death.
From that glory.
Death on a cross. It's a progression of things. When you look at that scripture, you have to look at it in the full context. It's like, he did not take it lightly to be one with God, to be God. But what did he do? He did a number of things. He humbled himself, right? He humbled himself to death. But not just any death. He humbled himself to death. At some point, Jesus said, do you think I cannot just tell my Father and call legions of angels? He had been given that power and will to the point where at some point he's like, Father, if it is possible, can we reorganize this thing a little bit, because
renegotiate the terms.
You get. But he says, yet not your will, not my will, but yours be done. Yeah. And it's the basis for that we get, for me, if you read Hebrews 4, the basis by which, and again to bring it to the point of where you say that marriage, we're talking about it in that context, and the fact that it is related to Christ being the groom, we are his bride as a church, and the parallels that are drawn. We are told, Hebrews 7 talks about how he has suffered, right? once and for all for us, it's a done deal, right? And it's the power and the beauty and the importance and significance of why Jesus is different from anything else, why he is central to any conversation about salvation or the gospel. It's not about things or blessings or whatever. It is entirely about the fact that God comes in the form of a man, he dies, right? So when you go to Hebrews and it says, we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but has been tempted and tried in every way, and yet was without sin, we therefore can approach the throne with confidence and boldness to receive grace and mercy for our time of need. If you take that portion of scripture and simply hinge your entire life on it, it solves everything. Your wife annoys you, Jesus, here is your daughter. Your husband annoys you, dear Lord, here is your son. Because you have that understanding that this is something that's much, much bigger than me. And because we have been conditioned, one of my favorite words in 2024 has been conditioning. Conditioning for children, conditioning for us as adults. I'm turning 45 this year. I've been conditioned for 45 years. There are things that have been conditioned into me that might not be right, but because they have been ingrained for so long, it's like trying to remove a tattoo using a napkin. You're going to struggle to try and remove a tattoo with water or a napkin. The amount of work you have to do to find a particular laser to be able to remove that tattoo from your skin is almost exactly the same thing that you're going to have to do to try and change somebody. One of the mistakes we make in marriage is that we try and change people. You're never going to change a person. You don't have the capacity to do that.
You can't even change yourself.
No, you can't. Only God has the ability to illuminate to you as a spirit that, you know what, Felix Kitaka, you have problems from your past. Then, and hopefully you have the humility to accept them and then be willing to. Let me tell you guys a very quick story. I'm a typical Manyankole man. No offense to Manyankole, but we are not known to be the most romantic people on the planet. We know this, right? At least you hope that we do. But because you're aware of that, we are romantic in our way, not necessarily the way that women will understand. But again, you have to find that balance, right? Because the woman is going to be a woman. She will want to be loved in particular ways, regardless of what your culture or traditions are. And so one of the things that usually happens is that, one, being a male, two, from the culture and everything, by default, there's going to be tendency towards what can be perceived as arrogance and pride, right? And just this week, that happened for me in the most fascinating way. My wife brings me passion. I like taking passion fruit in the morning for bowel movement. So she brings me a passion fruit, and she brings it with a knife and says, here, and I said, take the knife away. She's like, that thing is hard. I'm like, please. She's like, okay. She goes away. So I pick the passion fruit and try and crack it. So there's a particular brand of passion fruits that is so hard, like it's really hard. Yeah, the small ones. So I try cracking the thing with my fingers, no luck. I tried banging the thing, no luck. I tried literally looking for things that I could use to crack that thing, and I realized it was a complete waste of time. My wife was right. So, but in that moment, I'm thinking, I have to go out and tell her she was right. No. I mean, I've done like an office. We'll figure this thing out. And in that very moment, I'll never forget. It was maybe 4 or 5 days ago. My spirit just says, "Hey, that guy." And I walked into the bedroom and I said, "So, I need to confess something. You were right about the person."
And she must have just smiled.
She smiled, but she was in shock that I actually came and admitted that. Because normally, I'm like, I got that. Yeah. But I realized in that moment that many things go wrong in our relationships because we are not willing to come and say, you know what?
You were right and I was wrong. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Not willing to die. Yeah, but this one, because it was a bit it was funny and amusing even for me that she actually, by the time she came to you with a knife, she knows you enough to know that you need the knife. So for you to, I disregarded it. I refused it and turned it away.
And she probably knows something you don't. And she knew it was
But
hard.
you didn't consider it.
But that's the arrogance. By the time my wife thinks, because she knows me well enough. So by the time she brings the knife, she knows that I'm going to need it to be able to cut through this thing. So extrapolate that against so many other things that we do in our marriages and our relationships. So if you put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 of those things together over 15 years, is the reason why you have people who've been married for 45 years. And the woman wakes up one day and says, you know what, I'm done. Thinking, I'm sorry, what, 45? You could have gone at 3, you could have gone at 5, you could have gone at 10, you could have gone at 25. There will be a trigger at some point where, you know what?
I can't deal with this.
But if you purpose, and the hope for me usually is that for those of us who have a relationship with God, who have put our faith in the fact that we are sinners saved by grace, the only difference you have from the person who doesn't know God is that you know that you can go to God and complain about your spouse, and God will go and cane that Dwanzi and whip them into shape, which has happened in our marriages. I'm sure I know you guys well enough to know it's happening.
And in some cases, he first shows you the speck in your eye.
Yeah, and he says there's like a small forest here, so why don't we first... so, yeah.
And interesting, as you mentioned something about, there's a path in life I took. I learned to dare to go where the brave dare not go. I came to realize that there is the finished work in the spirit, but then there's the manifestation of the finished work. When the children of Israel are given the land of Canaan, it was given them, and by legal right they had the land, but they had to possess it. Now, when you look at the journey of possession, they had the divine empowerment, but also they had the skill to fight. They didn't just march on and just say, when you see how Joshua took certain cities, you see there was actually certain art in how they took it. And I came to understand that even when it seems to you doing, God can grant you the wisdom on how to fight certain battles, right? And that took me to a place of appreciating knowledge. There's a lot, I've seen an element in the church where people are fed spiritually and they deny the mental feeding. You see? Yeah. So there's one who goes through marriage and there are the spiritual realities pertaining to your marriage, but also there's the knowledge on how you conduct it. I'll give an example. I never forget the first time I understood about the psychological difference between men and women. It was knowledge, not from the Bible. Yeah. It was from a book. That knowledge was liberating. Yeah.
Because you are different.
Pardon?
You are different.
Exactly.
You are...
But suddenly, I could understand the fights we were having. Yeah. Now, I'd been praying to God. I was like, God, help me here. God, help me here. I'm losing it.
This woman.
This woman. But the advantage I had, my natural desire as an individual, is to not to blame people, but to figure them out. Yes, I think my background being a software developer, when the software is not working a certain way, you look for the bug. You don't just the software, you look for the bug and fix it. So I was always looking for a fix. How it has to work. This is not rocket science, right? But I had to understand there's a part about the altar, but there's the knowledge that allows you to conquer. When children of Israel have to take Jericho, and God gives them instruction, go around Jericho a couple of times. This is how you're going to take Jericho. It was a walled city. There's no way in, no way out, right? But God gave them the mechanism to take Jericho, right? And I've built my life on two parallels. I feed my spirit and the mind. My spirit and the mind. When it goes into in terms of wealth, and I saw this thing fascinating. I acquired skills as a software engineer. At the peak of my career, I got some decent US dollars per month. Now, was that a product of spiritual or mental? You see, there's a thing goes hand in hand, right? I mean, there are people who talk about the things that are miraculous. I don't pray to God for miracle money, things like that. The challenge with that, I like to be able to have knowledge I can pass on. You see, this is the way. And one of the things I came to understand is where the Europeans may have an advantage over us. They discovered certain pathways, documented them, and they're no longer a prayer matter. Imagine the first kids who are having polio. I imagine people scratch their heads. Some may have prayed to God, God, how do we deal with this thing? Some probably were cured through healing. But then there are those who got the wisdom on how to deal with polio. And the moment they found a cure, polio is no longer a prayer issue. It's
You have a drug for it, right?
You can
fix it.
You see?
Yeah.
Now, and this is what's fascinating. I never forget, I read an essay a while back, years back. And this essay said something interesting. That science, every time it made advancements, so it was like this. So there was a part where science said this is to man, because we know it. Everything there is God. Now, every time science made advancements, they started to decrease what's of God and say that's to God, right? So you start to realize that most people attribute to spiritual everything they can't comprehend. You see? So, because think about this. There's a man today who is looking to God to eat. But there's a man who knows how to eat. Predictably, no prayer issue about eating. Now, in like manner, take that to marriage. There are problems to marriage that man is taking to God that have been solved. That there is a knowledge sufficient for you to solve that problem. But now, because the only weapon they have is a saying to a man with a hammer, everything is a nail. Now, to that one, everything is a prayer point, but people have solved it, right? And my hope is saying, I think it's what inspired Kitaka's podcast, that there is no crowdsourcing for best practices in marriage. Yeah. Marriage is a very private affair, and yet it's not new. With all the numbers of people that have been going through marriage, the collective wisdom, I believe, is sufficient to solve many problems. But unfortunately, everyone that the best practices you acquire, you don't share. If you share them in other tongues.
Yeah. With the angels. It's very interesting. When Jesus was teaching us how to pray, what was his precursor to this prayer? He says, when you pray, do not do what? Do not babble like the pagans do. Why? Because they think they will be heard for their many words. We live in a time now where we think that because you go to the overnight Friday, you're in a better place with God than I am, who bows down and prays for 4 seconds. We've completely failed to remember that God doesn't look at what you're doing on the outside, pacing around the church and screaming at the top of your voice. God says, I look at the heart. Marriage is about the heart. It's not about words or things or whatever. You mentioned something about feeding your spirit and feeding your mind. There's a third dimension. There are 3 dimensions. And we forget this a lot. Rukh-Shana Kitaka is a spirit being that lives in a body and has a soul. A soul that has been conditioned for a few decades. Right? That soul has a manner in which it behaves and it must be managed. Her body has to be managed. If you're a married man and you haven't had sex with your wife for 8 months, I don't care how spiritual you are.
Your body will.
There's gonna be a problem. Can we agree on that? It doesn't matter how spiritual you are. Your body and your spirit are different entities.
Of course, it's a level of death where you'd be okay.
I don't think so. You can try and kill it to a certain extent, but like you said, the demons in their council will be saying, this guy has gone 3 months without any. There's like a guy in the mobile money shop, the one who doesn't wear bras. You make sure next time he goes that. And it's only a matter of time, right? You must be able to, as a spirit being, so at the core of who you are, you're the spirit being. Ideally, you should be in control of both your body and your soul, which is why we fast. You're telling your body, you're not in charge. I understand you're hungry, you will be fine. I'm able to go up to 7 days without food, so kakana, right? And you'll give it some fruit and whatever, you can do it 3, you won't die. And after 3 days, the body will have allowed, then you can, whatever. And what that does for your spirit is that your spirit gets strengthened, right? Because you, right? And it's the same thing with your soul. And again, for me, for those of us who are getting along in years, your soul becomes so much influenced that if you're not careful, it is possible for you to live your entire life in the realm of the soul and even mistake it that you think that you're living in the realm of the spirit, but in that you're not.
Because the line is very thin.
Yeah. So I see some of the things that we do as Christians, I'm like, that's just your feelings. Of people who will say, God said to me, I'm like, and you have to be alert to know, was that God that spoke to me, or was it my soul, was it my feelings? And the best example that I usually give for this, and it's one of the things that I've been passionate about also in the last few years, how David, for me, is the best example. If you read Psalm 42, what does David say? As the deer pants for, so my what?
My soul
longs.
after thee.
And he goes on, and then eventually, because David was no stranger to feeling low and downcast and whatever thing, so David tells his soul, he says, why are you downcast? Oh, my soul. And he instructs his soul. He tells his soul, put your hope in God. For I will praise him, for he is yet my countenance. He is my savior. David, the spirit, has a connection with God. He understands very well. David, the soul, is struggling. His son is trying to overthrow him. This one has done what? All of that stuff is overwhelming. And it happens even in our marriages. The man is coming back home late at night. He used to be very romantic. All of a sudden, you don't understand how he changed, all of these things, and you're thinking, how do I deal with this, right? So you, the spirit, remember the vow that you made. You know the connection that you had. There is, as if it's there. Everything in the circumstances is saying something completely different. Do you allow to succumb to that? David says no, which is why a lot of the time, and many people miss this thing. If you look at a lot of the Psalms, David, he says, praise the Lord.
Oh, my soul.
Who? He says, praise the Lord, oh my soul. And to do what? Yes, and all that is within me. Praise him and do not what? Forget not his benefits. He keeps on reminding himself, who forgives all your sins? Who heals all your diseases? Who crowns your life with love and compassion so that your youth is renewed like the eagles? And he goes on and on and on and on. And the entire time, he's saying, right? It got so bad that in the Battle of Ziklag, when David has come with his people and they've taken their wives, usually it's when you take a man's wife, and property they can take, it's the woman usually. And it says that David's men were so distraught and angry they wanted to kill him. They wanted to kill their leader. And he says that David was beaten, he was out, says, but he encouraged himself in the Lord. And the point I'm trying to bring home here is this, that even in the context of marriage, again, and I'll keep saying this over and over and over again, on a daily basis, you have not just grounds and justification, you have enough reason to be able to tell Rukh-Shana, Madam, it's okay, I'm done. On a daily basis. For some people it is, you didn't put the mosquito net on, therefore we are done.
It's from the silliest to the most complex.
We had the most fascinating conversation with a couple. Rich and I were speaking at one of the fellowships. They invited us, we were privileged to spend some time with them. And so we shared experiences, like you're saying, knowledge, right? And these two guys were sharing an experience of how they didn't talk for 4 days simply because the man wasn't putting the mosquito net on.
And she was tired of putting it down.
And it was like, it became a big issue that escalated to what we call black and white. Yeah, the picture was black and white, no color at all in the bedroom, right? For like a whole week. Simply because, again, combination of things. Conditioning. For me, I don't want to fall sick, malaria, everything, Mosquito net must be on. So there's a whole logic and thinking and emotions behind wanting the mosquito net on. On the other hand, you have a guy, you've grown up in a place where there's always been such little space. You are sleeping as 7 people in one room. And so for you, anything that seems to inhibit fresh air and freedom makes you feel very uncomfortable. So it's okay. Let the mosquitoes have a blast, no net. Those two positions are not able to meet. They're not able to find an understanding. And so what seems like a very simple thing, it's just a mosquito net, or it's just laying the bed, or you just mopping the bathroom, which my wife eventually accepted, and she allowed, because for me, again, it's for most men, we joke about this all the time. It's water, it will go, it's cleaning the floor, right? For the women, it's a different thing.
But Ben, I have a feeling that even with examples like that, where it is a practical example, I have a feeling that when you peel back the layers, it's never really about the mosquito net. It's not even about me being scared of falling sick. It's just that represents something that is so deep-seated that unless you actually take the time to examine why this little thing is like a mosquito in my ear, you will never get to the heart of it. And more often than not, the person who struggles with that aspect has to be the one that does a real deep dive to understand what the issue is. Why am I actually upset about what seems like a very simple matter? Because you see, I cannot change my husband. He cannot change me. I can change the way I respond to him, but I can only change the way I respond to him if I understand why I respond the way I respond. And for me, it's like the last 3 years, I have been dealing with my deep-seated issues. That I honestly, if anyone had told me they existed, we would probably talk until morning, and I would assure you that I had no issues. I have absolutely no issues. This is a very basic issue. Right. Can you not see that he is at fault? But when you honestly and this is the interesting thing. I mean, I can't speak for other people, but my experience has been, God has taken little incidents and over time held a mirror to me, and I see what the issues are. And when
are we allowed to psychoanalyze you live on?
No problem. I mean, Ben, you've known me for over 20 years.
So, look, there are a lot of people who are watching, who follow the podcast religiously, and people who have known Shan, for example, and they're like, this is not the Shan we know. They thought they did, right? Thinking, but this is not. And what they don't understand is this, I've known your wife for almost 30 years now, right? And I have never met a bigger control freak than Rukh-Shana. Like for her, everything must be aligned. My plan for the next 3 years must be in order. I have, this is what I'm going to do, this is how much money I'm going to make, this is where the plan is going to go, this is what... And we used to have fights. And I would tell this beautiful wife of yours, Madam, please understand, you're not in charge. And I think for the longest, so I look at you guys now and I just marvel at what God can do.
Oh, for you, see the miracle.
Oh, oh, trust me, I do. And I'm like, for Rukh-Shana to even consider that, you know what, I'm going to step away from this good, well-paying job and take a leap and go and live a life of faith. I'm like, is she okay? Is she dying? Is she because this was just never the thing. But like she's saying, it's a thing of where it has a history, it has a background that has layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. And so eventually, as you begin to discover, oh, this is who I am. Okay, God, how do we deal with this? And then you start the journey.
That's quite powerful, and it's quite humbling. And these are moments where you marvel at the wisdom of God, because I met my wife at a particular juncture, and we started the journey. Prior to that, I don't know. And
A lot that you didn't know.
from the moment I started working with my wife, I was like a minister to her. I don't have, she started the journey of changing when she met me. So I don't have that before. But God in his wisdom has people like Mwine who actually are there to witness the before and the after. Now, what's fascinating, some people are losing their heads. They're like, wait, it's not the lady we know, right? And now they're looking at me has killed the lady, the great lady they once knew.
Blink twice.
Yeah. Thank you. Now, hearing you say, what's amazing, you're saying things that when I was, the things we dealt with, but I wasn't conscious of that they've been there. It's like as though my brain told me, this is what, she's just starting out. Let's get this in line, right? And it was that place of, bring her to the place of where don't be trapped by the world. Dare to believe God, right? It is a place where you get to live. Yes, you cannot live if you're trying to control all the variables of life.
Not that you have the ability to control
don't
them.
have the
You're just deluded into
In
thinking.
your head that tells you actually can.
But God.
No, you're actually not in charge. So here's the thing. And I understand where a lot of people will be coming from. I've seen some of the comments on the last episode, right? And I just marvel and laugh. Just give me a minute to explain this. Your name is Felix Kitaka. If you decided tomorrow morning that you want to change your name to Shubidu, right? And you tell us that you want us to now call you Shubidu, does that make you Shubidu?
I am, the name is the brand, to identify.
Right, but legally, can you use Shubidu to fly out of Uganda?
No.
If you've changed it.
But legally, right? The point being that there are principles that are non-negotiable. That until you get a deed poll that changes your name from Felix Kitaka to Shubidu, it is not your name, regardless of your opinion, thoughts, feelings, desires.
It's not a feeling issue.
It is not a feeling issue. We have found ourselves in a world where feelings are so, what's the word?
Not glorified.
Beyond glorified. Emboldened to an extent where it is absolutely ridiculous. And again, I want to bring this back to the context of marriage. Marriage isn't a human construct. It is designed from A to Z by the creator of heaven and earth, God. Whether you believe in him or not is inconsequential. The principles are not going to change. What your feelings are then, if your feelings are in contrast or in disagreement with the principle that God has put in place for how this thing works, you are going to lose.
Swimming against the tide.
You are. It's premium tiers, no matter which way you look at it. The way God designed this thing is in such a manner that, and people now, when you even get scared of, can I say it? They're going to come after me, right? God made us separate. Our chromosomes are different. We were having a big fight about this with a bunch of men that I interact with, about whether men should cry and whether we should call conferences where we pour out our feelings and deal with our mental health. And some of us are a bit on the softer side. We think that there is a need for men to be in touch with their feelings a little bit. There are, some who think, no, you die like an officer. You deal with it, right? But the truth of the matter is that our tolerance for certain things is different from the women. Women are very emotional beings. And again, when God looks at Adam, what does he say?
It's not good for you to be alone.
And therefore I will do what?
I'll make you.
Make you what?
A suitable.
A what?
A suitable helper.
Suitable helper. Not just any chick because you like her boobs and the butt, therefore that's... No. I will make you a suitable helper. That verse triggers feminists so much. We are equal. How could Rukh-Shana leave her job to go and be a housewife? That man has taken her. My wife keeps telling me, I need you to go and make so much money that I don't have to worry about looking for money at all, so I can sit. Right?
So I can focus on other things.
I can focus. And here's the thing that a lot of people won't understand. That being a mother, being a wife, being a helper is a lot more work than being a CEO of MTN. We have a wonderful CEO at MTN right now, Sly. She's incredible. Go get her. She's done all these things. But guess what? She's still a wife, right? And she'll tell you, when you're 85, no one is going to be giving a flying monkey that you are the CEO of Google or Facebook. There's a guy who died just recently, the good actor, Sutherland, Donald Sutherland, 80-something. And I was reading his eulogy and obituary on one of the big websites. And they're going back to when this guy started in 1950-something. And I'm thinking, can you imagine when people thought of this guy in 1960? He was like the biggest thing ever. If you ask the average 20-year-old, they will ask you, who is that?
They might not even know his son.
They don't know his son. They will know Jack Bauer. They won't know who Jack Bauer's father was. But when you look at the history those guys had and how they grew together as a father and a son, right? The things that matter are not what the world has told us to think matter. Being a mother, being a wife, being that helper is so much more important than being a CEO. Because when you're retired and old and gray, being a CEO won't matter. The impact you had on your children will matter. The impact you had on your husband will matter. And because they've been deceived into thinking like that, anything that seems to suggest that a woman can be support system for the man is absolutely thrown out. We must do the same thing. Felix must wash dishes. I don't. Do you wash dishes? I told Rachel, I love you. I will not wash dishes.
Don't measure the love.
No, but my love for you is not measured by dishes. I will find the money to pay for someone to wash the dishes. It is not in me to wash dishes. I think I washed enough dishes as a child. I grew up in a family of 6 boys. We hardly ever had a maid. My mom is a typical ninja. She will tell you, If you want to eat, you cook. But you better cook because your father is coming home. You better find food at home. Right? So because of that, so you grew up in a place where, we used to do laundry, we used to, cook. Okay, I didn't cook as much as my little brothers did. My smaller brother, Bernard, is an amazing cook, right? But in doing all of those things, when I got to the point where now all of a sudden I had the ability to make even just that little bit of money that allowed me to take away that burden from myself, I'm not going to be caught washing dishes. Let me worry about world peace. Let me worry about changing, growing the economy. So this one time, I remember we had a big fight over the dishes. So I said, you know what? I promised my wife, I said, okay, just to show you that I can be romantic, I am going to do the dishes. Okay, it's like, okay. So 10 p.m., it's like, what happened to it? I said, no, I'll do them in the morning. Look at how. I discovered that day that apparently for women, if dishes stay overnight, I think demons enter the house.
Unless otherwise, they really need to be done at night.
Why?
Unless otherwise.
We are in the bedroom over there. There's a door on the bedroom. There's a door on the kitchen. The dishes they are in a confined space, right? They are not going to jump out of the sink. There's not going to be a smell that will cause sickness. The dishes can be done in the morning. Life won't end. That's how men think. For her, the dishes must be done tonight. So long story short, she eventually actually goes into the kitchen and does the dishes herself, which now insults me. Okay, fine. Silence, black and white. 2 days over dishes. Yes, what I'm trying to say.
Principles are bigger than dishes.
Of course, they are bigger than dishes. But the principle for me is about people understanding that God made us differently and gave us roles that are equally important.
Important, yes.
Being a wife is not less than being a husband. It doesn't mean that the husband doesn't take the responsibility of being the leader in the home. Can you imagine if we lived in a world where there's not to make decisions as a country, everything is done by...
Truth be told, one of the best things, and there's so many amazing things that have happened to me getting married, but one of the best things is not having to make decisions. I really don't like making decisions. It's too much work.
You've been brainwashed by Felix.
It is
She
too
doesn't know
much
it.
work. I'm disillusioned.
Bring
It's way, I did that for, I can't say 40, but over 20 years of my life. And it was the most painful thing to do. I really don't want to make, and I think he still sees the signs and symptoms, even because we work together. And really, there are certain decisions, even in work, that I just don't want to make. Because I'm like, can I just tell me what to do and I do it? I really don't want to make the decision. Because you see, with making decisions also comes the responsibility. And that's a lot of work. But also, let me double back a bit on this whole helper thing. And I think it's the choice of words. So people look at helper and it sounds, and I think that's probably where the help came from in the house and blah, blah, blah. But one of the things that I've come to realize is that if you're meant to help someone, you can't be helping from a place of weakness. The only way you can help is if there's a certain strength you have. It may not be the same strength your partner has, but there's definitely something you have
Think about this.
that you bring to the table.
Don't bring a tool that is not valuable to help you get the job done.
Exactly. I think the problem is then we start comparing the tools in the toolbox. But who says we need to compare the tools in the toolbox? They're all valuable tools.
True. Well, in all fairness, I think that we might need to put some context into this as to why this is happening the way it is.
There's a thought I want to bring out that's been lingering in my head.
Sure.
Yeah? Most of the times when we talk about ego is synonymous with man. But when you go and find where ego comes from, you see, I came of age with people using words like ego. He has an ego. And I'm like, wait, what does that mean? So I like to understand things, not just learn to use them. You see, someone can know Felix by name, but you don't understand him, right? And the people who use the word ego, they don't understand it. And I went and looked out the word ego. It's the word that came up by a man called Sigmund Freud, who was big on psychoanalysis. Narcissism is the inventor of all those words that are go-to.
That we throw around.
Which should say quite a lot.
Thank you. But what's interesting, recently I was learning a bit of Latin. And it was interesting telling how to say I am Felix. And you say ego sum Felix. It took me a while to discover, wait, this ego is the ego people talk about. So you start to realize ego is just the word I in Latin.
Me.
Just as you say I.
Yeah.
So I is not gender.
I is.
It's the self. So when Sigmund Freud was looking for a word to capture the essence of the self, if he called it self, it wouldn't be a unique word. But he borrowed from a different language. That's common for the sciences.
Yeah.
They borrow Latin and Greek to define things. It's like someone saying the word man and uses the word from another language, and suddenly it seems like a name of a thing, not just the word that defines the thing, right? And what I feel, what you're seeing in the world today is women developing bigger egos. Yes. Where suddenly they also want to be at the front. Why am I at the back? I want to be at the front. Now, but they're still stuck in the inertia that men have big egos. Because the literature from the past has defined ego to the man. Now, women have egos, but they are not conscious of their egos. So suddenly, being a helper, nigga, please, right? The ego.
I'm going to be right after
Yes,
that, yeah?
yes. If you can do it, I can do it.
Give me some punch.
And that is that's the place where the devil kicked in.
And boy, did he kick in.
When he stopped, he started to feel like, God, there's really nothing there. I can also do some things, right? And I think when you look at the part of the generations prior, I'll use my example. I look at my mother and my grandmother, and there were women who were not trying to compete with their husbands. They didn't see them as enemies. And one of the things that comes up is when Genesis, God told Adam, who told you you're naked? There's someone who told women they were naked and convinced them of their nakedness, that is trying to cover themselves up. But what they don't know, that change is them getting off course. So now you try to find a situation where even men are not flourishing. And the women are saying, what's happening to the men nowadays?
Yeah, why aren't they stepping up?
But they stopped helping the men. They're wondering now, why is it the men are not doing things?
Because
You stopped helping. Go on.
no, so I was actually going to speak into that, but just talking to women on average, and correct me if I'm wrong, and your viewers can comment and comment if I'm wrong. In a basic relationship, when you're deciding where you're going to go out for a date night or to eat, I discovered apparently that women get really frustrated when a man is not able to make a decision and say, this is where we're going. Well, what do you think? Or what do you think? Or what do you, or like Sean was saying, there are things we shouldn't have to be debating. You're the man. Decide, right? And so that just shows you how it's not a crime, right, for the man to be a leader, because it is what God has given him as a role, to be a leader. It's a natural progression. The problem is that, and it's something that we have to be very brutally honest about, men have abused this privilege. While the devil might have, so it doesn't hit only one side. The devil is going to try and disorganize you from every flank, right? So while he's trying to convince the woman that that man is getting in your way, imagine what you could have been if you hadn't had 2 kids with this man. You could have been on top of the world, right? And so they drum this in, and this then gets drummed into their daughters, right? On the other side, they're telling you men, you are patriarchal. You know, the words that get thrown around, the patriarchal society. They do have a point, because what the devil did on the other side, he went and convinced the man, you are it. Don't let a woman talk back to you. How dare she? She's nothing.
And the man forgot that there is wisdom in listening to the woman.
But what did the man do? He put the woman in her place. The woman's place is in the kitchen. Right?
Forgetting she wasn't just helping in the kitchen.
No, she never always. My dad built 3 houses. I can tell you for a fact they were all built by my mom. I don't think he would have even put. I'll never forget 1989, I think it was, when the conversation started, right? Just before we moved to Kampala. And then I remember I'll never forget that day. I remember it like it was yesterday. My mom tells my dad, no, it's okay. We shall sleep, don't worry. 1 brick at a time. Let's do the brick, we will go. Right? And I'll never forget my mom calling me and my big brother Kenneth and saying, so guys, this is what's up. We're going to start building. That means that some privileges that you expect might not come. Your shoes might wear out. You might not get clothes at the same pace as some of your friends. This is why.
This is the reason why we're building.
Right? Would my dad have been able to do that? Maybe. But for me, because that's from my perspective, right? What the devil went and deceived the men about is that you're the boss, you're in charge. Right? You put that woman in her place. If she tries to answer back, in fact, slap her. I look at some relationships, and it's happening even in the church, in the Christian circles. And because, in the church, the woman can't say anything, right? But so many men have been deceived into thinking that they are all of this. And so because of that, they've fallen into the devil's trap. They've abused this responsibility and privilege they've been given by God, and thereby armed the feminists and everyone else with the power to say, patriarchy, patriarchal society. Yeah, because you've actually handed them the right by misbehaving. And the generation of our fathers fell into this trap very badly. It's the harsh truth. At some point, I had a very candid conversation with my dad. I said, I think you need to be a bit nicer to your wife. Like it doesn't hurt you to say please. Not you. The average man in Uganda, the average man that is above 55 years old, thinks that his woman is below him. They think they can speak at them, instruct them, command them. That was never God's intention. Again, if you bring it back into the parallel of what marriage is vis-a-vis our relationship with God, what did Christ do with his church? He died for the church. Like he laid down his life and said, I'm dying for my bride. Which is why the instruction from Paul to husbands is what? Love your wives as Christ loved and did what? Died. How many men die for their wives? So all you hear is the argument of, submit, let him love me first.
But also, they're looking at their mothers and they say, I don't want to become my mom. I don't want to become my mom. And unfortunately, a lot of our mothers, they stayed.
They got the short end of the stick, didn't they?
Yes, they stayed. They kept their end of the bargain. And now, in our generation, are like, no, I know better. I am not going to become my mom. And everything in us is, I will not become my mother.
Right.
I did not get educated to become my mother.
Right.
My mother didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
She had nowhere to go. I make my money. I pay my bills. I can get a baby. I don't need a man.
And then on the other hand, now because of what's going on, then now the men are now treading on eggshells and refusing to be leaders
Yes, and then
of like, you know, everything. And you're like, wait, yeah, what's the man?
And as you're speaking, where I draw my sense of the order of marriage, it is the nature of the church, where there are different people. Paul used the analogy of the body. There's the head, the leg, and the hands. And this is what amazes me.
There's even another part which we never talk about, the one for ignoble purposes, and he refers to it. So, because Paul he talks about the arm, he talks about the head, but he makes a very good reference to your rectum.
In Romans.
Yeah, it says there are some parts are for noble use. Some parts we don't give them enough attention, but you get constipation and then you realize.
So, and when I saw that's why I picked the idea of oneness in marriage. It is, and when we were studying our company, my wife and I had to make a decision. We are 50-50, right? Now, societies today, there's a lot of mistrust. That when you say 50-50, you're like, yo, what happens if this sister somehow decides, right? But I'm like, no, that's I'm willing to. That's the faith in marriage. You act from your faith, the substance of things hoped for, not from your fear, right? But I, as we're speaking this, I see the dynamic. Why some people are even triggered by our podcast. Now, there's an example you're talking about of how men have abused this. I don't have a good picture of that. You see? Yes. I don't have a full picture of that. So my consciousness is not so alive to the abuse of men, right? Even when you go at home, even if my father may have had flaws, because my father had me when he was 40. So which means I'm brought into the world as my dad is 40. So his entire evolution as a man growing up, by the time I come, is quite grown up, right? So, and my theories pertaining to marriage, I draw analogies from the word. When Paul talks about the unity of the body, I'm thinking about the unity of the home. But now as Felix starts from the unity of the body as Paul speaks, the person who's listening begins from their father or their husband. And now they feel I'm a selfish person. But I'm not thinking about the problem, I'm thinking about the ideal. And I learned, there's something that I became conscious of about thinking about things above. You see, there's life at the surface, but there's life above, where things are eternal, where the basis of actions is about eternity, not carnal, right? But as you bring out that dynamic of where the men abuse the position, and that creates the sort of the conundrum. It's a catch-22. What comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? Because we've encountered men who are, like, personally, I feel sorry for men who wash dishes. You see? I feel sorry, but I could be wrong, right? But I feel the man washing dishes takes on a certain position that you may actually struggle with the respect you expect from your wife. It's a theory, right? Before someone murders me.
I wouldn't know. Maybe it's a hobby for them. Maybe they like their hands being soft in the kitchen. I don't know.
Yes. So the dynamic of it is saying, what comes first? You see, Paul, I like the brilliance of Paul's words. Because he said, husbands, love your wives. Wives, respect your husband. Right? But this is what's interesting. When a woman respects a man, it's easier for the man to love her. When the man loves a woman, it's easier for her to respect him. But someone has to seed it. Someone has to carry the loss and plant the seed.
Who goes first, right?
Actually, another theory to add there to it. What I think the desire is sort of what you call perpetual motion. Perpetual motion is something that is like a wheel that's self-sustaining. The love flows, the respect flows. But even in a wheel that has perpetual motion, you have to seed it. It's like a generator. Before a generator can start functioning, and you have to first do that manual work.
So who pulls?
Who pulls?
Who pulls the string? And so here's two stories. One from my life, one from the Bible.
Okay.
The
I do
Jews,
that all.
the Jews are being threatened. There's a pending genocide. And there's a man called Haman. Right? And this is it, it's a wrap. The guy has done his scheming, right? And then there are three key people four. So there's Esther, there's Haman, there's Mordecai, and then there's the king, right? We know that Esther saves the day. How does Esther save the day?
How does Esther save the day?
Right.
Esther took the counsel of her uncle. Her uncle advised her on what to do.
Right. Her uncle
Understood
the power
certain
of the
things.
woman.
Yes.
Do you think her uncle had the ability to go to the king and blurt anything? Absolutely not. Him as who?
Yeah.
But this man knows that the power
Can I
that...
just bring out something you've just opened up to me. When God creates a man and puts him in a place of leadership, you see, the worst part when you become in a position of power is a place where you become sort of a God to yourself. Now, there is a power when God puts a woman who has a certain window where no matter how big you are, they can still plant an idea that brings you to order.
And you use the right phrase, plant an idea.
Yeah.
That is wisdom.
No, that is power.
That is power, actually. You do not tell the king what to do.
So here's the thing, and I say this a lot, and people think, I say it jokingly a lot, but the truth of the matter is that we're not in charge. Why was John the Baptist beheaded? No, he was beheaded by the king. Technically, only the king had the authority to order for that guy's head.
Who has the power?
Power.
It was the woman.
It was the woman.
What did she do?
She didn't have, actually, you bring that up.
There are two women in the
She doesn't have
mix.
authority.
No, she doesn't.
But she has the power.
But you see, a wise woman understands what kind.
Power.
A wise woman understands that she has power.
Yes.
She also recognizes that her power is not the same as the man's power.
She knows that her power has the ability to make use of the man's authority.
And you need him. Yes, you need the man. And the man needs the woman. In the case of who's that guy who was really being crazy and his wife?
David and Nabal.
Nabal.
It was Nabal.
Yes. The foolish.
The foolish man.
Anyway, continue.
So the point I was trying to make is that Esther has the ability, right, to be able to go to the king and say, so this is what's going on. And says, what? From this day, this is what's going to happen, right? Samson is a very good example. Eventually, at some point, because of his love for this woman, he gives in. We've had situations in our marriage where I try to explain to my wife the power that she has, and that her power is not in necessarily there being equality in decision making, any of those things. And one of the best examples I remember, and I believe eventually, I think she got it. I know it's a bit frustrating for her, but I think she gets it. That thing of who pulls the generator string. And the argument for many women, as I know it was for Rachel, was, why aren't you the one pulling the string? Why does it have to be me pulling the string? And this was in particular regards to every time we had a fight or disagreement. What would happen is that because by default, it's a bit, there are some exceptions, but by default, the woman is always going to be the peacemaker. In 99% of the cases, I think. There might be some exceptions where some men might be peacemakers, but on average, the woman will always be the peacemaker. And what I'd say to Rachel is this: you're seeing that as a weakness on your side, and I think you're getting it all wrong. This is your superpower.
You are able to do.
Your superpower is your ability to be able to come and say, let's make peace. Because inside of you, there was this kind of thing that doesn't want to rest. We must talk about this. That's your superpower. How do we ensure that we take advantage of it? And I'm telling her, embrace it, right? Don't be bitter that every time we have a fight, it is you who has to make peace. It is your superpower. Ultimately, the God is one. Peace.
It's like you are the leg that can walk. Don't argue why you're always the one walking.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It seems frustrating at the time, right? But the truth of the matter is that let's figure out what is your superpower, what is my superpower, and then it comes down into the whole thing of now how you find a way of being able to communicate and make sure that the person is understood. I learned very late in our marriage the importance of recognizing feelings and acknowledging feelings. These are things that I didn't know. For me, everything is always going to be logical. You come to me with a problem, we'll find a solution for it. I'll give you advice. And at some point, I discovered that there are times when my wife will come, and all she wants to do is just unleash her feelings, right? And at some point, I think it was one day where she said all these things, and my mind is saying, but she can do. I'm like, I remember, hey, guy, you've learned. And I look at my wife and I'm like, I hear you. I'm here. I hear you. And that was it.
And that was your soul saying.
My soul was saying, you're being silly. This is what you need to do. They did what? What? Send an email tomorrow. In fact, working, it was, I think, something to do with work. Like, go and... Yeah. But at that point, I had learned.
That's your superpower.
Yeah, because now I had learned of, women like to be acknowledged. They want their feelings just to be heard. Like, you've had the joke about the man who was the best husband in the world, and his wife only discovered, I think, 25 years into their marriage that he couldn't speak. Yeah, he listens. And he's such a listener.
He never says
he nods. And so I think that, again, it's not a conversation you can have in one day and exhaust, but at bare minimum, there's something that Shan said about you being able to go and understand, why am I the way I am? And being brutally honest with yourself to acknowledge that, you know what, I have issues. I have trust issues because of past relationships, which then you're now exporting onto this poor man and affecting this relationship because he doesn't know where you're coming from. And he's simply judging you based on how you're treating him and saying, why is my woman distrustful of me? Right? You have people who have issues with, and again, like you said, it's the small things, but are not small because of the things that are lying behind them. One of the things that my wife knows is that she cannot scream at me. And I've made it very clear to her. The day you scream at me, we are done.
Oh.
No one.
That's an interesting dimension.
Felix, it is bad. For me, it triggers being screamed at. Triggers it, not text. It cuts all the wires. There was a point a boss of mine once tried to scream at me. He learned. I walked into this guy's office. I told him, you know what? If you ever do that again, I don't care if you're my boss. I will throw you off that balcony. It was many years ago. And I was not joking because I had been triggered. And I think that guy looked at me in the eye and realized, this kid is not joking. He's like, this guy is not joking. So for all of us, you have things that can trigger you to the point of no return. If you understand them, because I understand myself, so I've explained to my wife, please never scream at me. So when we are having an argument and the volume is, the decibels are beginning to increase, there's this thing that she really hates that I do. And I always tell her, please calm down.
Does that sound familiar?
Oh, and he said, because, and I took time to try and explain to her that for me, this is something, because for most people it might not be a big deal, right? There might be other things that are triggers, but for me, I don't know why, right? It's such a thing that I think in my mind it's ingrained, it's rooted that if you love somebody, there is no room for you to scream at them. You can be able to express yourself, explain whatever you... Punch me if you have to but don't scream at me.
But if that argument holds,
Right.
what does that say about parents, those who sometimes scream at our children?
Never do that. Never ever. You have no idea how much damage you do to a child, no matter how frustrating it is to you and what they have done. Because your child is in a place where you have authority over them, they don't have the power to tell you, Daddy, if you scream at me again, I'll throw you off the balcony. What they do is they go back into their cave.
And start modifying something.
They will start changing certain things, and those things will change so much over the next 10, 15 years. By the time they turn 20, they are carrying them with themselves.
Meet a Felix somewhere there.
Who triggers them?
Who triggers them. But also, think about what damage you've done to this kid and what you have killed in them. And we are learning these things now. Our parents didn't know.
When you're mentioning that, and what I see is that there are things that seem to be individual things, but really they are gender things. And it's why, for example, when you mentioned that raising the voice,
Calm down.
and I told my wife, does that sound familiar? You are shocked. You're like, wait, that's there too? And yet I had another man who mentioned the same thing about how when the wife raises her voice, and when I tell my wife, like, it's not raising a voice per se, but I know the sound of it. There's a certain sound. My system knows this is, right? And that's where the elements, I have a hard relationship with science, because on one hand you have science, on the other hand you have my spiritual knowledge. So I made peace where I'll use science when it justifies me, but when it starts to challenge my beliefs in God, I cut it out. But the theory of evolution has an element to what you're saying, right? It is people evolving with different things are piling up inside. You see, think about for right now, you can trace someone's parents by DNA. So there's clearly transference of things being transferred, right? And you start to realize that just as men, if we have distinct parts from women, it means there's a transference common to us. You get? That men have a common transference by the build on their bodies. Now, what makes you think that transference only stops with what you can see? You see? And it is very likely that those things are the same to all men. And that's the thing about this podcast. It is, now imagine you're sharing that. There's a man who's going to say, wait, I thought it was just me. that is the thing.
Right.
But it is an element for something you're alluding to about trauma. But seeing the element of trauma that transcends the individual, that gets into the species, right? Because I never forget, as a young man, I had a fear of approaching women. I was always nervous trying to say hi to a woman.
Like any young man.
Thank you. And then I go doing this reading, and I had this man who shared an idea that many years ago, the risk of a man approaching the wrong woman would be the loss of your life. Yes. You try to speak to another man's woman, regardless of what you're trying to say, you could lose your life.
It's the same up to now. If a guy tries to talk funnily to Shan,
but now you can see how that evolutionary goes on to affect who you are. So, and what's fascinating is the experience of a child and their upbringing is the shortest length of time. Now, the power is, by one man, sin entered the world. From Adam, there's an inheritance passed on. So you start to realize that experiences of my life, in my lived experience, is the shortest length of inheritance. That a bunch of the inheritance is carried on from before. And I think this is where marriage creates an interesting dynamic, because there is the offender and the offended. But the offended is not in full control of their taking offense. So there are two dynamics.
they might not even be aware as to where the offense is coming from in some cases, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you start to realize there are two parts. There's the one who's offending, then the one who takes offense. And I got to realize that marriage requires us rising above our carnality. Anytime you think about things that are inherited, that's our carnal nature, right? Even the desires in us are inherited, right? And you start to realize is that the offender has to be mindful of the other person's inheritances, that they actually can protect their marriage, right? Just know about those things. But this one also has to know that these things are inherited. Don't be a slave to them.
Can I add a dimension to that?
Yeah.
Sometimes even the offender is not alive to the offense that they are carrying.
I didn't want to go there because it would complicate the equation so much. But yes, it is.
Half the time you don't even know you're offending.
No, that's the whole point. And you have a very strong point, and I think it comes back to now where the communication comes from. Look, let's be honest. By the time you go up to a woman and tell her, I want to spend the rest of my life with you, you've done enough research or spent enough time with them to have liked, hopefully, right? Hopefully. To have seen enough things to say, I want to be with this person. Then the evolution steps in, and then the reality of background and all of these things now kicks in. And then you begin to discover this person, you're like, hey, we are different, hey, we have issues, hey. I believe that if you have made that vow and said, this is it for life, I'm not walking away from this thing. From that point on, it becomes a conversation around how do we navigate this situation. Yeah. One of the fights I used to have with my wife, and thankfully we don't have it anymore because in her journey at some point, she saw my side of things. And it's another one of those gender things, men, women. Yeah. On average, whenever there's some sort of fight, men want to tackle the issue. Yeah. Women want to tackle the men. Have I lied? Think about it. Again, let me explain this. On average, when there's a fight, disagreement or whatever, the general inference from the females will be, you did this, you did this, you did this, you did this. Yeah. And you can go and check all the fights you've had. 95%, maybe more. I did statistics, so I like to make up numbers in my head. Let's say the majority of the times, you're pointing fingers at the man. The majority of the times, the man is pointing fingers at the issue.
What's interesting, the reference I have from what you're saying is not from my wife. Right. It's from the comments.
Right. Right?
Because they are pointing at the man.
Yeah.
I'm like, what's the issue?
Yeah, what's the issue? So on average, women will point fingers at the person.
And not the issue.
and not the issue. Men on average will say, what is the issue?
There's another dimension to it. Aristotle had something. There are three things defined. I think some things of rhetoric, something. And he had ethos, pathos, and logos.
Yeah.
I'm sounding fancy now, ain't it?
It wouldn't be if it
So,
didn't sound fancy.
Ethos is about character.
Yeah.
Pathos is about emotion. Pathos, that's where words like empathy, sympathy come from. Logos, that's the word, right? Yeah. And it's interesting, it is that part of women being emotional, right? But they're relating, so the part of relating with a person is because emotion is with person. It's not a thing. It is how I feel.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That's why when you're looking at
How I feel.
yes, and it's relative to the person,
Right.
not the issue.
Unfortunately, when they're communicating it many times, it's not about how I feel, it's about what you did.
Because what you did
You
is
hurt
what
my feelings.
resulted in the feeling. Outside of what you did, I wouldn't have to deal with
Do you realize the difference between saying, I feel hurt because of what you did, and you hurt me?
I can't solve the problem.
Do you I like the way you're blushing, Shan, because you're vindicating the point here. And I dare your viewers, especially the female ones, to just be honest enough to take a quick look at themselves, right? And think about this. You hurt me versus I feel hurt because of what you did. Because in a marriage, if you honestly believe that this man loves you, you must be able to extend the benefit of the doubt to believe that he might have done something stupid, but it wasn't because he went out of his way of like, I'm going to hurt this woman today.
You see, the thing is, if I say I feel hurt because of what you did, then it means the onus is on me to deal with the hurt part.
Yes and no. Yes, we need to deal with you feeling hurt, right? How did what I did make you feel hurt? Where does that come from? How do I need to be more sensitive to that, to understand what it is that triggers you or hurts you, so that I can be a bit more careful in how I do that? I didn't hurt you.
It's what
You feel hurt. I did something that made you feel hurt.
respond a certain way.
Yeah.
Actually, another way to add that is the framework of perception that came to me many years ago. There's an intention, an action, and a perception. So what you're dealing with is the perception, but my intention was not what you perceived.
Exactly.
You see? So it's a reconciliation of those two.
And because of that lack of communication, you have many issues. Let me ask you guys a very simple question. How long have you been married now?
We make 3 years in November.
3 years.
Yeah.
What was the first fight you had after you got married?
It had to do with laying the bed. It had to do with laying the bed. I don't even know why I thought that my husband would lay the bed. Really?
What's interesting about that first fight is I have fond memories as a kid, being in my parents' bedroom with my mom laying the bed. And I'm rolling on their bed sheets and she's trying to lay.
So
right?
for you,
As far as I'm concerned,
the fulfillment and the joy.
no, I didn't have an idea of my dad laying a bed. Like, it's so far-fetched. Like, it's not something I even have a law, I don't lay the bed. I am not conscious of it enough to even set it as a law. Now, the expectation, we're going to lay bed, I'm like,
And if I were to be honest, I don't know where that came from for me either. Because my father really laid a bed. How? I don't remember.
So, but maybe could it be that the fact that you're thinking, I want you to be a bit more involved. I'm looking
It
forward to.
wasn't that at all, actually. I had a clear logical explanation. And I remember we went through this with Mwine Kitaka. Mwine Kitaka, in his infinite wisdom and his excellence, bought a certain kind of mattress, which is extremely heavy. Like really heavy. I would rather we didn't have a very heavy mattress. The bed sheets had the elastic. The bed sheets had the elastic. Now I had to lift the mattress in the corners to tuck in the elastic bed sheet, and it was heavy, and I was tired. So here I was thinking, come and help me, please. Okay, if I still stayed on the bed for a very long time.
please.
I don't know. Sometimes I forget the stories as we go.
Interesting part. Now, the laying of the bed also had the raising of the voice.
Yes, now, my voice kept.
No, not kept. There's a point raised up.
I don't even remember that, but you say I raised my voice.
Long enough to understand how loud that could probably be.
What's interesting is I was more conscious of dropping my voice several decibels, not raising it.
When a man is saying raising voice, he's trying to give language to what he can't explain in language.
Yes, because for me, I think I was actually very deliberate. If I wanted to express displeasure, I drop it.
Yeah.
But also in dropping it, because it's quite deep, I am making a point.
So the reason I asked that question is because you look back at that now, and it's absolutely laughable. Yeah. We can laugh about it now. At that time, in that moment, it was like, what did I marry? Right?
We wrote about it.
Yeah, it's like what?
From both sides, he's wondering what kind of woman.
What kind of woman is that? What is
kind
this?
of man is, can he come and help?
You get, and that's the thing where that discussion we're having about how once you take time to understand each other, I think for me, marriage should be a simple thing of, look, guy, we are doing this thing for life. Yeah. So now it's in our interest. Let's try and understand. When an issue crops up, let's understand what's the genesis, where is it, let's learn, where is it coming from, how do we communicate better. We had a similar situation, again, growing up. I drink milk tea every evening before I go to bed, without fail. And bread.
Wow.
Because my mom used to be a baker when I was growing up, and when she would come back home in the evening, there's the bread that is defective, as if that you can't sell because it maybe came out. It is still good bread, just it's not presentable to sell. Yeah. That's like gonna come like that. That's gonna come back home. That's gonna be yes. Right. So every day, I would normally, almost on a daily basis, I'm gonna sit down. I'm gonna eat almost half a loaf of bread on my own with milk tea.
Also, you could afford to eat half a loaf of bread because bread was abundant.
Yes, my mom is a baker. Whatever she's baked, whatever is not going to go to the shop is here. We're going to eat that, right? So for my entire life, bread and tea up to today. I'm struggling. I'm realizing now I'm at a point where it's not healthy for me, but I have failed to let it go for now. I'm hoping that when I turn 45 in September,
I understand your love for buns.
Now you understand my love for buns.
I just had Ben loves bread.
Yeah, now
he just loves it, but now
and there's a whole different episode about our childhood and how it affects us and who we are. I've done a whole research on it that's mind-boggling, and so far I've tested it on maybe about 20 people, and it's proven to be empirically correct. Again, statistics. So, but here's the story. Because of that, there was always tea. Growing up, when my dad came back home, right, there was tea in the house. When we were leaving school, especially when we moved to Kampala now, because at least in Mbara, there are cows, there's milk. When you come to Kampala, mommy's going to call dad in the office. We don't have milk. There's a list of things we don't have, which is given to him. And then when you're heading back home, you go and buy the things and go. So this one evening, I go back home, and there's no milk.
And you never received a phone call.
That was it. Grounds for divorce. Like, what? You know that I take tea every day, right? Why is there? I didn't. So all these things I'm telling you about my childhood, blah, 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 only came out after this incident, because we had to now go and do a proper forensic audit of what triggered me, why it came from, because it was a big issue. On Rachel's side, right, growing up, all she ever saw was, whenever Daddy Tibbs came back home in the evening, he would come back with things. Milk, bread, whatever. Rachel never saw the part where Mommy Tibbs called Daddy Tibbs
Said
and said these are the things we don't
So
have.
she saw just part of the.
So she only saw the part where Daddy brings the stuff
You
home.
had it to put the milk and you
I had
added
it,
the milk.
and that is exactly what she said to me.
But you're
Did you
like, you
bring
didn't
it?
tell me.
Exactly.
Like, but read it.
Thankfully for us,
Wait,
we had-
that's quite profound.
Oh, it is.
It's tackling,
life-changing.
it's tackling a challenge we've dealt with for a long time, where I sit at the table and there's something we don't have at the table, and Mary said we didn't have. I was like, why didn't you tell me? And I solve it. That's interesting.
No, that's the thing. We were fortunate enough that at the time this happened, we had established a relationship strong enough to be able to tackle the issue as opposed to taking offense. Because we see when you take offense in these small things of this kind, what woman did I marry?
Oh, yeah.
And then it stays in somewhere at the back.
Then you start labeling.
And then you start labeling. And all it takes is now for another 3 or 4 things to sit on top of that. And in your soul, in your feelings, that's where things like resentment and the bitterness come from. The unfortunate thing is that for many women, they'll never even say. They'll put on a fake smile, they'll go to bed, they'll open their legs for you because it's demanded of them. And you, if you're aloof as a man and you're not being aware, you'll completely miss it. And then you look up, over time, you look up one day and the woman is just, she's like, I'm done. Like you guys don't know each other at all. Yeah, you don't know what happened. And that's why and it doesn't matter if this has been going on you're married for 20 years and this is where you are now. It can be reversed. All it takes is that honesty and humility to say, you know what? I need to know what I have done wrong, me as a person. What damage have I done? How do I undo it? And because we refuse to do that, now the pride then comes in. How do I go and admit that her, bringing me the knife to cut a passion fruit was right? Nah, I'm going to ignore it.
And actually, from what you're saying, is most people, they approach marriage sort of like someone who has an instruction set on how to operate.
Yeah.
They come with their approach to marriage does not put into mind the other person.
Yeah, it's expectations for me.
No, but also it's a place where they have particular process of what you're supposed to do.
Exactly.
This is what my mother did.
Yes.
So they're trying to play their mother, but who was acting for a particular man.
Yes. Who had a different
dynamic.
Yeah.
Now she goes, listens to her pastor, what the pastor does,
And her friends.
and then now she wants to be like, she said, I did like my pastor. Now, what she fails to realize, or even what he fails to realize, is that you need to tailor, what is the saying about tailoring to your clothes?
You cut your coat according to the cloth.
Yes. You see? That's what people are not doing. And that's why you find there are couples or individuals in the comments, they are disturbed by me.
Triggered, not just disturbed.
I like that.
Triggered.
That's an accurate language.
They're triggered.
They are triggered.
Yeah.
But what and you bring out a powerful point. Marriage is not about individuals being perfect. It is about you finding the imperfections that make them perfect. You can get two pieces that don't weigh the same scales. You know, a seesaw, you can have something here and something there. They may not be the same height to balance out, but you can move one closer and it will balance. You see? Now, most people are saying, look at this person's problems. The bigger picture they're missing is, wait, how does Shan comprehend that man and find a balance? How does that man comprehend Shan and find a balance?
Because what they're doing is they're simply putting themselves in Shan's shoes and saying, how would I, if I was Mrs. Kitaka, how would, I cannot. So they, you know how women have this thing where you guys have fights in your head? And you even before the fight happens, these guys will have a fight. They will respond what they expect you to respond to them in their head, and have a whole fight, right, until the end. Meanwhile, the fight hasn't started yet. So the first time they say anything, they are already at DEFCON 1. And you're thinking, what's going on? Right? Ngakumbe. So I think a lot of people will see this, and so they instantly insert themselves into where Shan is, and they decide instantly, I don't like this man because he triggers me because of all of these reasons, and therefore because of that, now we have social media, I can put a comment and say this man is horrible, right? My wife is an angel. You guys have, do you know her, right? She is literally the most amazing individual there is, right? I, on the other hand, am the average bumbling idiot, right? And
That's not the image I have.
well, my propensity to mess up is, let's just say, sufficient, right? And almost everyone knows this. Now the problem that this created was that my friends who know me well, Ben, he's a nice guy, he can be harm and everything, but he's Ben, right? Yeah. My wife is the perfect human being, literally. The problem was that Rachel at some point began to see herself that way.
As the perfect person.
Of, you know what? I did you a favor marrying you, which is true, right? I am thankful.
You didn't marry yourself.
No, I wouldn't.
I felt that way as well.
I
If I were not, I would marry myself.
Of like, God, this was surely God giving me an angel. And so because of that, the devil now then takes advantage. I don't know if you guys know this. I'm sure you do. You've experienced this. And the average married person will relate with this perfectly well. The devil's biggest weapon against you is your spouse.
How recent have you had?
I think like last week.
I think yesterday.
Was I listening yesterday?
I asked you about the consciousness. How did that thought it came from you?
No, in the morning after his
Today.
shower, yes. No,
Yesterday
yesterday morning after his shower, yeah.
So listen, I don't know how to explain this in a way that it can sink in people's heads. The devil's biggest weapon against you is the person who can hurt you the most, and that is your spouse.
Because they have access to your underbelly.
You have given them the deepest recesses of your being. No one else can reach the place where your spouse can reach, assuming you've allowed them to do that, which normally you have by allowing to spend your life with them. Which is why the person who can hurt you the most will be that person. Yeah. The devil knows that. Can we please remain astutely aware of the fact that the devil is real? And he will not hold a megaphone on Kira Road to say, the Chitakas, I'm coming for you. He's not going to do that.
He'll be sneaky.
When the devil is coming after Job, he doesn't call a press conference. He simply goes and tells God, that guy, you're being too nice to him. Just and
You
God,
see the real him.
yeah, I'll show you. And God says, no, I trust my guy. He says, hey, okay, you bring him. So God gives Satan permission to go and test Job. We know this story very well. Tell me this. At what point in all of this is Job aware of what's happening behind the scenes?
No, it's not.
He's not aware.
All Job is seeing is his life falling apart. I don't know how many people are aware of this, but the things and calamities that befell Job, are you aware that they all happened in one day?
Oh,
Just one day.
Check your Bible.
I
No!
need to go back and read this.
Listen, this is what it says. The servant came and said, the cows have died. Okay? Then the next verse says, before his feet had left the porch, the next guy came and said, somebody what has collapsed. It says, before that guy had left, the next guy came and said, your children are dead. All of this stuff happened in the space of just a few hours. Job is completely oblivious to the deal that has been made by at strategic level, above his pay grade, issues of generals. Him is here dealing with, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be his name. Now, we have been so deceived into thinking that the devil is only he sends demons where people get deliverance at MCF and I don't know where, and that now for you, you are okay. The devil has absolutely no reach where you are. And guess what? He tries on a daily basis. Every day, Felix, the devil whispers things in your ear, saying, this woman. And it will be very subtle things, because the devil doesn't do short-term things. The devil is more than happy to wait for 15 years to destroy you. He has absolutely no problem playing the long game. And if you're not aware of it, he's coming to get you, because he's going to plant that seed. And then plant another next week, then plant another. And then, so it looks random. He's planting, you know how you blow up like a building? They place, they don't blow things at once. They first place, they set detonators around the entire floor. Then when they are finished, okay, now we are ready.
They press the button.
It's the reason why you see people been married for 30 years, and that they don't know the guy has been planting explosives every year. The planting. And then 15 years down the road, it's like, okay, buy it there. But they looked fine. Everything seemed okay. What happened? Every single day. That's why I said at the beginning when we started the show, we talked about dying is a daily thing. You must always be aware that as long as you have desired in your heart to serve God and do what is pleasing in his eyes, you are an enemy of the devil.
And he doesn't take a break.
Or he doesn't, and he doesn't play fair. He's going to be doing everything he can to come after you, and he will. Now the challenge is that sometimes we fall into his trap. And the moment we do, the moment the devil now has Rukh-Shana as a RPG pointed at you, and she has allowed willingly to become a weapon, you're in trouble. God forbid that he now then realizes, you know that thing in the movies where they play good cop, bad cop, and play witnesses against each other? They'll go to one guy and say, but Felix, what do you?
That's what the devil did.
Yeah. And then he says, and then he comes to Felix and says, Rukh-Shana, she has said you're the one. Now he points you guys at each other, and then you destroy each other. This is what is happening with marriages right now. The divorce rate in the US amongst Christian couples is above 60%. Can you explain that to me? People who are supposed to know God and walk with God, how can the divorce rate be 60%? And in the majority of them, even the only one reason that Jesus gave us acceptable, which is adultery, doesn't exist for most of them. Boy, I don't love him anymore. What?
Irreconcilable.
What is the irreconcilable differences? Did he kill your mother? If you go back and look at all of the things that usually cause marriages to fall apart, just people who have simply handed over this thing because of, I am pursuing my dreams. They've allowed so many things. I chose myself. I choose me. Self-love.
And it sounds noble.
It does, because you've been conditioned. Because we've been conditioned to think that way. You go back. Let me just give one last example. You go back and look at the last maybe 25 years of the content we have consumed.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
They did two things, especially, actually three. Number one, casual sex is fun. It's the way to live. If you want to be cool, you've got to do that. Number two, divorce is very normal. It's fine. You can be divorced and be best friends, and that's it. We're divorced. Majority of the TV shows will have divorced co-parenting that are hanging out together, and they have fun. Every once in a while they sleep with each other and then move on with their lives, right? And then number three, the Christians are usually the bigots. They are the ones who are in the cults. You go and look at any portrayal of Christians in any of the TV shows that you watch, or movies, or whatever. Usually the guy who's the Christian is the serial killer, he's the pedophile, he's the one who has a cult, he's the one who has... It must be projected in that manner that you're the bad guys. Now, because you don't realize that this is subconsciously affecting you, we've consumed this. When did we start watching Friends? Oh, there's one that I look back and I'm thinking, I can never get that time in my life. I pray God never asks me to account for the time I spent watching How I Met Your Mother.
Oh. And the womanizing of Bunny. He actually inspired people to...
I won't point fingers, but you don't realize how much...
how cool Bunny was.
Oh, Bunny was cool. Yes. Bunny was super cool. 2.5 Men.
Oh, yes.
Charlie.
Keep moving in and out. What's her name? I don't know her name. Yes.
And that conditioning happens over so long that now it becomes normal to you. And you don't realize that now, then, and it's all those sort of things, right? We are told not to be unaware of the devil's schemes. And I think for me, the biggest takeaway would be, do not be unaware of the devil's scheme to destroy your marriage. He has been trying from the beginning.
He's not about to stop.
He will not stop until you die.
Don't slumber.
No, you cannot afford to do that. And his biggest weapon is the person you're sleeping with.
It's not an external. The external forces are just, they just come into, but they don't.
Reinforcements. Those are just reinforcements.
But Mommy Mwine, this is the nature we can go on. I'm starting to worry about the length our cameras can accommodate. But this is amazing. I think we need another part to carry on this conversation. But someone, when he talked about self-love, it was just a hilarious insight that came to me. You see, when someone says self-love, you don't see a problem with it. When someone talks about narcissism, you see a problem. And yet narcissism came from a Greek mythology about a guy called Narcissus. And this guy, women liked him and he didn't care. But one day he went by the river and he saw his reflection in the water and fell in love with it. And he stayed there staring at himself. The narcissist is the idea of self-love.
Absolutely.
Now, but what's fascinating, that the narcissist, as part of his self-love, he was unempathetic. Now, when the people today see a man, the person who actually writes self-love on his status, will see someone who falls short in empathy and refer to them as a narcissist, and to see themselves as just
the victim who has to have self-love to protect themselves against the narcissist.
Not knowing.
Pot, kettle, black.
You're pointing 3 fingers backwards.
That's where we are.
Mwami Mwine, this has been quite a profound conversation, enlightening. It's the first time we're doing this.
I know, right?
Yes, it's the first time we brought a third party into
our conversation,
our dialogue. But who better, right?
Yeah.
Ironically, of course, you know, your wife connected us, but also we proposed in your home.
Yes,
right? So, but also you were friends way before. Yeah. And I've noticed the patterns God can do of placing people in time. You see, it says the devil plants things, God also plants things,
yes,
right? And my wife keeps telling me about one of the people, the circle of friends she had when she gave her life to Christ, that even you led her sister to salvation. But to see that you were there in that journey, and even as you're getting married, you're there and here. Now, there are many people who...
will be here until...
Amen to that, right? So as other people see and just look at this marriage, look at this man, what is done to this woman.
Let's wait and see.
Yes, there's a man...
Yeah, TikTok, timer is on...
There's a man who said, I have seen it all. And I'm like, wow, God is amazing. So just amazing me the people saw the same picture and painted me a villain. And you saw the same picture with more fidelity and clarity, and then you say, what a miracle, right? And I didn't know this when you were coming on, right? But I remember when someone was telling about, these guys need to have a couple men on your show to hold Mr. Kitaka accountable.
Yeah.
And like, which names do you recommend? They recommended some men. One name that there was Ben, right? Then I was there, I was like, you know what? Let's get Ben on the show. Let's bring Ben in, right? And to see how it has turned out could only have been God.
I think, to put it on the record,
Yeah.
where you need to be held accountable, we will hold you accountable. Yeah. If you, at any point, started to treat Shana in a way that we felt wasn't right, we will break your legs. Right? But there's absolutely no indication that anything is happening in that way. If at all anything, all I see is this beautiful individual that Shan has morphed into. And she knows, I keep telling her this every single time. I'm like, I just can't understand how you've become the way you have become, because I've seen the versions of from where to here. And I think for me, if you allow me to just say one thing that you pointed out that I feel is a very strong point for people watching this to understand. We've talked about how the devil lays traps.
Yeah.
God does exactly the same thing. Yeah. But in your life, if you allow God, we are told, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. Yeah. In all your ways, do what? You see, that word acknowledge, it doesn't mean go to an overnight every Friday. If you can't go, it is simply a state of being in your heart. Acknowledge
it's
over like
a
state of being. Yes. No, it's a state of being where, Lord, Mukama, go manye vyange. There's a song I used to love that says, Mukama, go manye vyange. There's no one else. You're the one. God is putting all these things. It can take 2 weeks. It can take 20 years. 20 years in the first of eternity is absolutely nothing. But here's what happens. In the case of a man called Joseph, and it's the example I want to give, God laid all these things over a period of 14 years. And he set them, and he set them, and he set them, and he set them, and he set them. And then at the right time, in his time, he makes all things beautiful. He pulled the detonator and said, Joseph is ready for deployment. And when God hit that button, Joseph went to bed as a prisoner and woke up as the second most powerful man in the world. And we know how that affected the rest of history. So I don't know what you're going through in your marriage, in your life, in your relationship. I've shared a bit of my story so people will know some of the drama that I'm dealing with. God is doing this. Your job is to simply acknowledge. God, it's okay. It doesn't matter. It might be next week. It might be 2026. It might be 2030. But when God hits that button, the longer it... Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Love you guys.
Benji.
Pleasure having you. Beautiful, beautiful.